Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. This is part 2 of our interview with Mr. Ray McGovern about the Iraq War, its origins, the current situation in Iraq, and what might happen in the future. Mr. McGovern is a political activist and a retired CIA officer. He previously chaired national intelligence estimates and prepared the President's Daily Brief. He is a co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. You can follow his work at raymcgovern.com and at samadamsaward.ch. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/Iraq-war-2. All right, so there are a lot more questions I have to ask you about the pre-war period and all of the lies and the real reasons behind the war. So I guess that'll give us an excuse to have you back on, but I want to shift our focus now to the actual war itself. Can you give a brief overview of sort of what the U.S.'s strategy was, which groups they allied with, which groups they didn't ally with, how those alliances changed, things of that nature?
You mean the attack on Iraq in March of 2003?
Right, from 2003 forward.
Sure. Well, it wasn't much of a war initially. We tried to bring in a division or two from the north, but the Turks said no. But that didn't really matter. We went in on a couple of axes from the south, and before you knew it, we were in Baghdad. We were pulling down statues of Saddam Hussein and making believe it was the Iraqis who were doing that. We had Chalabi, the guy that the neocons pinned their hopes on, right? He was, neocon. He was a neocon man for sure. I mean, I'll tell you, I used to root for the New York Giants, Well, the last time that Chalabi had been in Iraq was the same year that the New York Giants moved out of the Polo Grounds and settled in San Francisco. Something like 1958 or something like that. The guy had no following in Iraq, but he had conned the Pentagon, Rumsfeld and those people, into believing that he did. He fell flat in his face. The major mistake, well, there were several. The major mistake was made by a guy who didn't know, didn't know much about anything. Paul Bremer, who was sort of like the imperial wizard of the establishment in Iraq, the U.S. establishment. He disbands the army. Now, disbands the army and then says anybody who's been in the Ba'athist party cannot have a position of responsibility in the new Iraq. Now, anybody could have told him that was a really stupid thing to do. And without oversimplifying, if you fast forward to today, what is ISIS? What is ISIL? Well, it's composed mostly of those folks that were disbanded when they were the only force ready and willing to impose some sort of security and peace in Iraq, disbanded by the likes of Paul Bremer, who didn't know what he's doing. They were ostracized and marginalized in favor of the Shia. The Shia came in with prime ministers that we handpicked. They were the majority, but the Sunni could not be readily dismissed. And what you have now, of course, is a major conflict with the Sunni-dominated ISIS and ISIL or Daesh or whatever you want to call it, causing all manner of problems, partly because none of the people we put in Baghdad, none of the Shia leaders were willing to do business with the Sunnis. In other words, we could crow till the morning and say, "Oh, you got to work together," but there's so much corruption, so much power over, so much disregard and hatred, Shia for Sunni and vice versa, that whereas things were relatively in check and peaceful during Saddam Hussein, however brutal a dictator he may have been, women were going to colleges. It was a rather civilized, peaceful society. Now it's a mess beyond compare, and that's a terrible legacy to have because it's still going on, and we're still trying to figure out why it was that all these people don't like us. Why it is that the army that Saddam Hussein had, predominantly Sunni, why they didn't like being disbanded and having nothing to do, and were allowed to take their weapons with them and knew where all the caches were and everything. if you wrote a book about this, it would be hard to get a sell because it sounds so far fetched. But people who really didn't know what they were doing were running our policy under the direction of Field Marshal Cheney, Rumsfeld, and a fellow like George Bush, who I think showed his hand when very early on he bragged about saying, "Well, it looks like I'm the first war president of the 21st century. I'm the first war president of the 24th." Did you hear what I said? The first war president. I mean, hello. So we had this mindset here, and we're paying the price. Everyone's paying the price for it now.
What was the use of military contractors during the Iraq War?
Well, we used to do KP, that is in the old brown shoe army. GIs used to do all the work. We never hired people to come in and dispose of our waste and build our showers and cook our meals. So Halliburton, or the folks that Cheney used to head up, well, they made millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, by supplying services to an army that had been pared down and was not sent into the battle, so to speak, with enough men to do the job. Now, again, General Shinseki told them, he said, to do this, you need a couple 100,000 men. And Rumsfeld said, that's crazy. Wolfowitz says, that's far, far exaggerated. And they got rid of Shinseki. So what I'm saying is that these people are still alive. They've never been held accountable. There should be a new Nuremberg, actually, because after World War II, our chief prosecutor made a big point of saying, look, this time around, it's the Germans who are in the dock. It could be us next time. So let's be aware of that, and let's proceed in a way where there are no more wars of aggression. Well, now we have some, okay? And we should be in the dock. When I say we, I mean the people who are clearly identified with lying about this war and perpetrating it, together with all the, this is really necessary for people to realize. After World War II, with Nuremberg, a war of aggression was not only condemned, but it was defined in very precise terms. They said a war of aggression is to perpetrate the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only insofar as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. Wow, accumulated evil? Yeah, think torture. Think kidnapping people off the streets of Milan. Think black sites. Think of getting 54 other countries to cooperate in what we call extraordinary rendition, which is a fancy word for kidnapping for the purposes of torture. Think about all that, and you've got accumulated evil up the kazoo, all right? And nobody's being held responsible, and that has a very, what shall I say, a very deleterious effect on the way other leaders throughout the world conduct their affairs. There's nobody to look up to now, and that's one reason why we have chaos everywhere we look.
Now, one subject that often comes up whenever the topic of the Iraq War is brought up is the surge, and you still hear a lot of neocons, a lot of people who are more or less mouthpieces for the Republican Party, people on Fox News and elsewhere who say, oh, the surge worked, the surge was so wonderful. So what was the surge, and what's the truth about whether it worked or not?
Well, that's a very good question. The accepted common wisdom is that this really, really prevented worse from happening in Baghdad and the surrounding areas. Now, we're talking 2006, okay? By that time, it was clear that we couldn't win in any meaningful sense this invasion, this war, this occupation. Now, who knew that better than the generals in charge? General Casey, out there in Baghdad, General Abi Said, CENTCOM commander in Tampa. They testified before Congress in September of 2006, and what did they say? They said, Congress members, please, we know you want to help us, but please do not send any more troops. If you send any more troops, the Iraqis will never, ever get it through their heads that they have to work out things. Shia and Sunni have to work out things to create some degree of peace and security in the country. So please, I know you mean well, and really like, we're trying to do our job, but look, the last thing we need is more troops. Now, this is McCain and everybody hearing that, right? So what do Bush and Cheney say? Mind you, this is 2006. Well, they go to their American Enterprise Institute people and all their hard right folks, and they say, what does this mean? What does this mean? And the answer comes back loud and clear. Mr. Cheney, Mr. Bush, this means you lose a war on your watch. Oh my God. Who else is saying this? Well, everybody's pretty much saying that. This Iraq study group, I mean, Jim Baker is involved in that. They came up with the same conclusions as the generals. And actually, Rumsfeld is going wobbly on this thing. He's listened to his generals for once. So Bush and Cheney said, well, how can we prevent losing a war before we ride off into the western sunset? And General Jack Keane, who had been Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army and who was a fellow alumnus of mine from the ROTC at Fordham University, he said, we'll have a surge. Robert Kagan and some of the other arch neocons said, yeah, a surge is great. We'll have a surge. We'll send 30,000 new troops into the Baghdad area. We'll secure it, and there'll be temporary peace. Don't worry about it. You can leave office without having lost the war. That's precisely what they did against the advice of all their generals. Now, who did they get to do that? I told you that Rumsfeld was going wobbly, right? He was wobbly. So what did George Bush do? He asked his daddy, and he asked his other Republican forebears. They said, what do I do? And there's a guy named Gates, Bobby Gates. He'd be happy to take Rumsfeld's place, and he'll do whatever you ask. Now, full disclosure, Gates used to work for me. He's a chameleon. He's a windsock. And he was, at that point, president of the University of Texas A&M, right? Okay, so Bush said, okay, that's a great idea. Bobby, would you come visit me in Crawford? and Bobby Gates said, oh, sure. So he goes there, and I wasn't a fly on the wall, but this is clearly what happened. He says, now, we have some problems here with Iraq. We're going to do a surge. Rumsfeld's not on board with this thing. And the generals, Abu Said and Tampa and Casey, so we'd like you to come in. And you don't have to do this alone. We have this really, really good-looking guy named Petraeus. He's got all kinds of, he's got 10 rows of merit badges and others things on. He's going to do the work for you with the surge. All you have to do is take a trip to Baghdad and make sure that Casey has a sinecure. Let's make him head of the army here in Washington. You got to can Abu Said because he's just obstreperous. You got to tell him to retire. And then you can become, Secretary of Defense. And Gates says, you mean I could become Secretary of Defense? And I said, yeah, that's all you have to do. And Petraeus will do the rest. That was it. We're talking election time, 2006. 2007, the surge. What happened in the surge? 1,000 U.S. troops were killed in that surge. That's what happened in and around Baghdad. Some of you will remember the video that Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, revealed. The murder of those 2 Reuters people and 8 other people or 10 other people right before your eyes. That was during the surge. The surge was brutal. It killed many times more than the 1,000 U.S. troops we lost. What did it do? Well, if, as I am convinced, its primary purpose was simply to prevent Bush and Cheney from having to leave town having lost the war, it succeeded masterfully. You put 30,000 troops in and around a city like Baghdad, you can do ethnic cleansing, which they did, separating Shia from Sunni. You can tamp down violence there, and they did. The notion that this was going to be a permanent solution, and the ostensible reason given that this is the only way you could get enough peace here so that Shia and Sunni would be able to work together, well, if they thought they could do that by a violent surge, They were sadly mistaken. I don't believe they ever felt that. The main purpose was to, as I said, if they lucked out and got Maliki or some of these other tin horn dictators to finally cooperate and overcome the corrupt people that brought them into power and work with the Sunni, then that might have worked. But it was ill-starred to begin with. It was very short-sighted, myopic in the extreme, but it achieved its major purpose. And the major purpose, as I said, was to prevent Bush and Cheney from losing a war. And in the event, of course, we got more and more brutal, more and more sectarian, more and more violent Shia leaders, and so violent and so extreme that even the prominent Shia cleric, Muqtada al-Sadr, has now a following that he's employing to make sure that the corruption in the parliament, in the government of this new fellow Abaidi, that it ends and that at least the Shia can reign supreme in that part of Iraq. The rest of Iraq, well, forget about it. Petraeus, what did he do? Oh, he bragged about training crackerjack troops, right? Oh, crack troops. Hundreds of thousands he trained, right? And what happened 2 years ago? What happened to those troops when a couple of ISIS guys took an AK-47 and shot it in their direction? Well, we know what happened. They ran, leaving behind $1 billion worth of U.S. tanks, artillery, other equipment. Now, people say, now, Ray, don't exaggerate. They didn't all run. The officers, the Iraqi army officers, they took helicopters out of the area, right? But we know that Mosul is no longer in Iraqi government hands. It's going to be a while before they ever get it back, if ever. And so, this business is not very clear to most Americans because of the media, the way the media is. And Americans just told to be very afraid, be very, very afraid, and just trust us. We know what we're doing. And the bottom line here is cui bono, who profits from all this? And, when you look at U.S. generals getting this star and that star and another star, and when you see U.S. war-making corporations making hand over fist, well, you don't have to go back to what Eisenhower said. You could see it right before you. And when you have leading generals bragging about, as Petraeus has said, my grandson, I'm proud to say my grandfather's son is going to be fighting in this war, and other generals saying, we're looking to a 30 years war. Well, have they no sense of history? That was a 30 years war. And it was finished at the Treaty of Westphalia. and countries agreed, it's really not a smart idea to keep killing each other off. Let's have distinct boundaries. Let's have borders. Let's respect the sovereignty of other countries. And I think that was 1648, if memory serves. It held pretty well with some notable exceptions. But now that and the Magna Carta, which was 800 years old last year, they have all been thrown in the dustbin of history. Witness what's happened to basic concepts like habeas corpus, like the rights of people taken prisoner in wars and all kinds of things like that. So unless there's a real change, a real evolution in this country, and they're not going to be with the two front-running candidates, but I still have some hope that the well-known mistakes and crimes of one of them, which are easy to expose, and which the FBI and NSA have the book on. I'm talking about gross violations of security practices with respect to secure communications, emails, other things. And I'm talking about perjury. I'm talking about a person who denied knowing, even though this person was Secretary of State, denied knowing that Benghazi, the so-called consulate, or later called mission, and the CIA annex, that they were thoroughly involved in scooping up what weapons were left from Gaddafi's regime and shipping them to, quote, moderate, end quote, rebels in Syria. Because why? Because Hillary said, Assad's got to go. Assad's got to go. She said that several times. So she denied that under oath. Trey Gowdy, the chair of that House Benghazi committee, knows that. The real question now is whether Obama will tell the Attorney General, look, Loretta, we don't want to be too hard. Look what we did. We gave Petraeus, who was grievously guilty of giving his girlfriend the most sensitive information in God's creation, and then lying to it to FBI inspectors. That used to be a felony, lying to the FBI. Let's let him off with a wrist slap. And we've done that for Petraeus. We need to do that for Hillary, too, because, she probably meant well. And after all, she's part of the establishment. Bernie is not. And so I fear that Obama will do what he usually does and cave in. His problem and Hillary's is that the FBI and the National Security Agency have the book on Hillary. They have the emails. They have the telephone conversations. They know what she said. And so from their perspective, if you adopt the mindset of J. Edgar Hoover, let her become president. Let her become, and she'll be very, very sensitive to our needs because, we don't say inside the Beltway, we don't say blackmail. We say pressure or leverage. But if she were to run and then become elected, there are all manner of people in SA who can dredge up what is already existing and saying, Obama let you off pretty easy. We're not Obama. Now we want $18 billion for this program, $17 billion for this program, and we don't want to have any peace with Russia or anything like that. So she will be beholden to these people, is what I'm saying. So it's a very dicey stage we've reached. The latest news came just yesterday when a federal judge here in Washington said that she may have to testify under oath about the emails because of a suit that is now in discovery, and that would be before the convention in Philadelphia. So what I'm saying here is that as bad as the outlook looks at this particular point in time, don't rule very good things from happening, partly because the proof is in the pudding. The pudding is in the FBI, and not only the FBI in this case, but in a far more powerful agency. It's called the NSA. They have the book on everyone. They can influence this thing. And if Obama decides to let Hillary off as he did Petraeus, there's going to be some real disquietude in the ranks of the investigators. They've been lied to once by Petraeus. FBI inspectors don't like to be lied to, and they don't like people to get off scot-free when they have the book on them.
So going back to Iraq quickly before we wrap up, could you talk a bit about the casualties of war, both the military casualties and the civilian casualties, and also what did life look like for the average person in Iraq before, during, and then after the war? How did life for them change?
Well, life became impossible for about 4 million of them. 2 million went to adjacent countries as refugees. 2 million others are looking for a different home. Baghdad was ethnically cleansed under the surge, which people still brag about, okay? And so the economy is in tatters. The real terrorists, ISIL, ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call it, control a lot of the north. The Kurds control other parts of the north. The Shia and Sunni are still not being able to work out things. The U.S. and China and others are taking oil out of Iraq, but the profitability of that has gone down with the price of oil sinking, and so the people are miserable. The people in Syria are miserable, and we're talking millions. Okay, a lot of them are in Jordan. A lot of them have gone into Turkey, and nobody asks, well, why is this? Who caused this? in Germany, I was giving lectures in September. The rubric or the title was often "Wie werden Kriege heute gemacht?" which means how are wars made today? And I changed halfway through. I changed the rubric. It was "Wie werden Flüchtlinge gemacht?" How are refugees made? The answer is the same, by the willy-nilly attacking of countries like Iraq, like Syria. It's just, it's hard to believe the damage that has occurred. And one of the contenders for presidency is in large measure responsible for what's happened in Syria. And we're talking 300, 400,000 casualties. And in Libya, which is a shambles after, at one point, being the most prosperous country in Africa, with a high degree of education for women as well as men, and a leader who, however dictatorial, was looked up to by the rest of Africa as somebody who would protect their interests, unlike the earlier colonial powers.
All right. Well, there's a lot more we could say about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump for that matter. And there's a lot more we could say about the Iraq War and the lies and the lead up to it and the aftermath and what's going to happen next. But I think we'll leave it there for now, and we'll have an excuse to have you back on.
Okay.
And on that note, can you go over once again where to follow your work, and then also if there's anything you recommend people read or listen to if they want to learn more about the sorts of things we've been talking about today?
Sure. First, just a little comment. We did run out of time, and it reminds me of the first teach-in 3 days after the attack on Iraq. American University, I get a call from a professor. He says, "Would you speak about the lies that before the war?" And I said, "Well, how much time will I have?" And he said, 7 minutes. 7 minutes, and they're going to scratch the surface. So it does take time to put out all the lies, all right? Now, as far as websites, I publish first, before I put the link on my own website, in consortiumnews.com. Now, the editor is Robert Perry. He uncovered the Iran-Contra affair. He fingered Ali North. He is a journalist par excellence. He writes, he edits, and it's the best website, bar none, on the internet, consortiumnews.com. Now, for people who don't know about Amy Goodman, democracynow.org would be a good place 5 days a week to get not only straight news, not otherwise available, but commentary of the kind that has taught me a great deal about American history as well as international history. So Amy Goodman, democracynow.org. And of course, my son, who set up my website, would be very angry if I didn't say raymcgovern.com, as the Washington Post used to say in its hubristic way, "If you don't get it, you don't get it."
All right. Well, and I'll, of course, add our website, wakeupcallpodcast.com, since we do 5 episodes a week. Not only do we cover these sorts of topics, but, of course, we cover economic topics and other political issues and histories of countries. So wakeupcallpodcast.com is our website. And the show notes page for this episode, Part 1, wakeupcallpodcast.com/Iraq-war. And then Part 2 will be wakeupcallpodcast.com/Iraq-war-2. And we'll link to raymcgovern.com and samadamsaward.ch and Consortium News and all the things we've been discussing here. So I want to encourage everybody to check that out. And also I want to encourage everybody to follow us on Twitter at WUC Podcast is the handle for that. And on that note, Ray, thank you very much for joining us today. And we'd love to talk to you again sometime in the near future.
Sounds good. Thank you, Adam and Daniel. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or subscribe on Stitcher. And check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.